The Tesla headquarters hummed with an electric urgency, a fitting metaphor for the company at its core. Phones buzzed, keyboards clattered, and hurried voices carried snippets of high-stakes conversations. It was the final stretch of the year, and the pressure to close deals, refine products, and meet towering goals hung heavy in the air. Amid the chaos, Elon Musk moved through the office like a whirlwind of determination, his sharp eyes scanning the data on his tablet while rattling off instructions to his team without pausing for a breath. Grace, Elon's personal assistant, worked with quiet efficiency just a few steps behind him. 7 months pregnant, she navigated the office with a determination that belied her condition. Her hand rested lightly on her rounded belly as she juggled an impossible list of tasks, finalizing a presentation for the board, confirming Elon's travel arrangements, and ensuring his impromptu meetings didn't collide into scheduling disasters. "Grace, where's the prototype update from engineering?" Elon asked, barely glancing up from his device. "It's already in your inbox," she replied evenly, her tone steady despite the weariness creeping into her body. Elon nodded but didn't offer thanks. Gratitude wasn't his strong suit, especially in moments like these when he was laser-focused on the mission. Grace didn't expect it either. She'd grown accustomed to his style, driven, demanding, and utterly relentless. But she took pride in knowing she was indispensable, the linchpin that kept his chaotic world from spinning out of control. Late in the afternoon, a scheduling error threatened to derail a critical investor call. Elon's frustration was palpable, his tone sharp as he addressed his staff. "How did this happen?" he demanded, his gaze darting to Grace. Calm under pressure, she quickly found a solution, juggling meetings and calling the investors to apologize and reschedule. Within minutes, the crisis was averted. Elon glanced at her briefly. "Good work," he muttered, already moving on to the next issue. Grace's lips curved in a faint smile. The acknowledgement, though small, was enough. As the day wore on, she pressed forward, ignoring the ache in her back and the fatigue weighing her down. She was a master of balancing the chaos. But as the final hours of the workday bled into evening, she knew the true test was yet to come. The office should have been quiet. It was Christmas Eve, after all. But Elon Musk didn't believe in slowing down, not even for the holidays. A critical project had hit a snag, and in Elon's eyes, there was no room for error or delay, not when the future of sustainable technology was at stake. "We're holding an emergency meeting tonight," Elon announced to his leadership team earlier that day. His tone left no room for negotiation. Grace, already exhausted from the marathon of the past week, felt a pang of dread at the announcement. Her body screamed for rest, but she nodded along, as she always did. There was no time to consider herself, not when Elon needed her. As the evening progressed, Grace found herself in the office's dimly lit conference room, surrounded by engineers and executives. Elon dominated the discussion, dissecting numbers and firing off questions. Grace sat to his right, her laptop open, taking notes and quietly managing a flurry of emails. Her swollen feet ached, and the subtle shifts she made to relieve the discomfort went unnoticed by everyone except herself. "Grace," Elon said sharply, pulling her from her thoughts. "Where's the latest projection for the Model Y?" "It's in the shared folder," she replied quickly, her fingers flying over her keyboard to confirm. She forwarded the file to the team, but her fatigue betrayed her. She accidentally sent an earlier version instead of the updated one. Elon's eyes narrowed as the error came to light. "This is the wrong version," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "We don't have time for these kinds of mistakes." Grace felt the sting of his words, but forced herself to remain composed. "I'll fix it right away," she said, her voice steady, though inside, she felt the weight of her exhaustion pressing harder. Elon didn't respond, already moving on to the next issue. Around the room, a few people exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Grace corrected the mistake within moments, but the tension lingered, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. As the meeting dragged on, Grace struggled to keep up. Her body ached, her mind felt sluggish, and her vision blurred at the edges. But she refused to let it show. To fail now would mean more than disappointing Elon. It would mean letting herself down. By the time the meeting adjourned, it was well past midnight. As Grace gathered her belongings, Elon approached her, his tone softer but still businesslike. "Make sure the final report is ready by tomorrow morning." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Outside, the world celebrated Christmas Eve, but inside the Tesla office, Grace was locked in a battle between her dedication to her work and the physical limits of her body. The cracks were beginning to show, and though she wouldn't admit it yet, she knew she couldn't keep this up forever. The Tesla office, usually brimming with energy, felt eerily still in the late hours of Christmas Eve. Only a skeleton crew remained, their muted conversations drowned out by the hum of machinery and the occasional rustle of papers. Grace sat at her desk, shoulders slumped, reviewing the final edits to the report Elon had requested. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind clouded with fatigue. The silence was broken by Elon's sharp voice, echoing from down the hall. "Grace, my office. Now." Grace's heart sank. She pushed herself up from her chair, her hand instinctively resting on her belly as she steadied herself. She walked into his office, her exhaustion evident in her slow movements. Elon was pacing behind his desk, his tablet clutched tightly in one hand. "I've been reviewing the project schedule," he began without preamble, his tone clipped and sharp. "There are inconsistencies, missed deadlines, and frankly, a lack of attention to detail. I rely on you to keep things running smoothly, Grace." "What's going on?" Grace felt the heat of his words, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Elon," she started carefully, "I've been doing my best to manage everything, but I'm—" "Your best isn't enough," he interrupted, his gaze piercing. "This company runs on precision. I can't afford to have my assistant of all people dropping the ball." She hesitated, the lump in her throat threatening to choke her words. "I'm pregnant, Elon," she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been dealing with complications. The doctor warned me about stress, but I thought I could handle it because I didn't want to let you down." For a brief moment, Elon's expression faltered, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Grace," he said, his tone softer but still firm, "I understand that your situation is difficult, but this company needs 100% commitment. We're changing the world here. There's no room for personal issues to get in the way." Grace's chest tightened. "You're saying my health and my baby's health are personal issues that don't matter?" Elon sighed, his patience visibly wearing thin. "That's not what I'm saying. But I can't have someone in your position slipping up. It sets the wrong tone for the rest of the team." "So what are you saying?" she asked, her voice steadier now, fueled by anger and disbelief. "I'm saying you're done here," he replied coldly, "effective immediately." The words hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, Grace stood frozen, staring at the man she had dedicated years of her life to supporting. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of his office, her vision blurred by tears. The night was quiet as Grace stepped out into the snow-dusted streets of Palo Alto. The festive lights adorning nearby shops and lampposts only served to highlight the emptiness she felt inside. The biting cold stung her cheeks, but it paled in comparison to the ache in her chest. She walked aimlessly, clutching her coat around her body to keep out the chill. The weight of Elon's words replayed in her mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. She had given everything to her role, sacrificing time with her family, her health, and even her own dreams to help Elon build his vision of a better world. And yet, it had taken him mere minutes to dismiss her as if she were nothing. Flashbacks of her time at Tesla flooded her thoughts. She remembered the late nights spent coordinating complex schedules, the times she smoothed over crises that could have derailed major deals, and the moments when Elon would briefly acknowledge her efforts with a curt nod or a rare good work. She had always believed in the mission, in the idea that they were making a difference. That belief had kept her going, even when the workload felt unbearable. Now, it all felt like a cruel joke. She thought back to the day she told Elon about her pregnancy. His reaction had been distant, but she'd chalked it up to his usual demeanor. She never imagined that her dedication would be repaid with such cold indifference. As she passed a small cafe, the smell of freshly baked pastries wafted through the air, reminding her of the simpler joys she had long neglected. Her mind drifted to her baby, the life growing inside her that now felt like the only thing grounding her in this moment. She paused, placing a hand on her belly, and whispered softly, "It's just us now, but we'll be okay." The snow crunched under her boots as she resumed walking, her tears freezing before they could fully escape. For the first time in years, she felt completely untethered, unsure of where to go or what to do next. But even in the depths of her despair, a spark of resilience began to flicker. By the time she reached her small apartment, the weight of the day had fully settled on her. She sank onto the couch, staring at the Christmas tree she had barely managed to decorate. Its twinkling lights felt hollow, a reminder of the joy she had been too busy to embrace. As Grace sat there in silence, the spark inside her grew stronger. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't let this define her. Elon Musk might have cast her aside, but she still believed in her own worth, and for her child, she would find a way to rise again. The quiet of Grace's apartment was broken by the sharp jolt of pain in her abdomen. At first, she thought it was just the stress of the day catching up to her. She leaned back against the couch, trying to focus on her breathing. But the pain came again, sharper and more insistent this time. Panic settled in as she realized these weren't just ordinary cramps. She was going into labor. It was far too early. Grace wasn't due for another 2 months, and the thought of complications sent her mind racing. She grabbed her phone with trembling hands and dialed for an ambulance. Between contractions, she packed a small bag, her thoughts a chaotic mix of fear and determination. She hadn't prepared for this, not yet, but she had to stay strong for her baby. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights and muffled voices. Paramedics reassured her, but Grace could see the concern in their eyes. By the time they wheeled her into the hospital, the pain was almost unbearable. Doctors and nurses surrounded her, their movements efficient and their voices calm, but the urgency in their actions betrayed the seriousness of the situation. Hours later, Grace lay in a hospital bed, her body weak and her mind clouded with exhaustion. The doctor entered, her expression carefully composed. "Grace," the doctor began gently, "your baby is stable for now, but we've identified a rare condition called placental abruption. It's serious, and we're monitoring both of you closely." Grace's breath hitched. "What does that mean for my baby?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor hesitated. "There's a risk to both of you, but we're doing everything we can." Meanwhile, at Tesla headquarters, Elon was wrapping up his day when his phone buzzed with a text. It was from one of his executives, someone who had known Grace well. "Elon, just heard about Grace. She's in the hospital. Complications with her pregnancy. Critical. You should know." Elon stared at the screen, the words blurring in his vision. A knot tightened in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation he couldn't ignore. He set the phone down, but the text lingered in his mind. Something about it felt heavier than he wanted to admit. Elon arrived at the hospital hours later, his steps hesitant as he walked through the brightly lit corridors. The usually composed billionaire looked out of place, his sharp suit and commanding presence softened by the uncertainty in his eyes. He wasn't sure why he had come. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was something deeper, something he hadn't confronted before. He approached the nurse's station, where 2 women were speaking in hushed tones. They didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in their conversation. Can you believe she was working until the day this happened? One nurse said, shaking her head. The stress she must have been under. Apparently she didn't want to let her boss down, the other replied. Imagine carrying all that pressure while pregnant. It's no wonder she ended up here. Their words hung in the air like an accusation, cutting through Elon's usual armor. He turned away before they noticed him, his mind racing. Grace's face flashed in his memory, not the composed assistant who handled his every demand, but the exhausted woman he had dismissed just hours earlier. Had he been so focused on his goals that he failed to see the toll it took on the people around him? Elon found himself in the waiting area, sitting in a stiff plastic chair. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. He stared at his hands, thinking about the decisions that had brought him here. Grace had been more than an assistant. She had been the one to shield him from chaos, to anticipate his needs before he even voiced them. And yet, he had dismissed her without a second thought. He thought about her dedication, the sacrifices she made to support his vision, and the way she had stood by him, even when it meant neglecting her own needs. He realized how far he had drifted from the values he once held dear. Innovation, yes, but also humanity and the betterment of lives. The waiting room buzzed with activity around him, but Elon sat still, lost in his thoughts. For the first time in a long while, he questioned not just his decisions, but the person he had become. Grace was fighting for her life and the life of her child, and he had been too blind to see what she needed from him, not as her boss, but as a human being. A nurse interrupted his thoughts, her tone polite but firm. Mr. Musk, you can see her now, but she's resting. Please keep it brief. Elon nodded, rising to his feet. His heart pounded as he walked toward Grace's room, knowing he couldn't change the past, but hoping it wasn't too late to make things right. The hospital room was quiet, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors the only sound breaking the stillness. Grace lay propped up against a mound of pillows, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes alert. Elon hesitated at the doorway, uncharacteristically unsure of himself. When she noticed him, her expression flickered, surprise, perhaps even disappointment, but she didn't turn away. Grace, Elon began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. I wanted to check on you. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. Come in, she said, her tone weary. Elon pulled up a chair and sat, his usual confidence replaced by an awkwardness he couldn't shake. He gestured toward the monitors. How are you and the baby? Grace hesitated, her fingers curling around the edge of the blanket. It's complicated, she admitted. The doctors found a genetic disorder. They're still running tests to confirm, but it could mean long-term health issues for the baby. Elon leaned forward, his brows knitting together. I had no idea. No, you didn't, Grace replied, a faint edge to her voice. Because you never asked. The words stung, but Elon didn't flinch. He nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth. You're right, I didn't. Grace exhaled, her posture softening slightly. I didn't want to make it anyone's problem but mine. That's why I worked so hard, Elon. Your health insurance was the only way I could afford the kind of care my baby might need. Elon's chest tightened. He thought back to the countless late nights, the extra hours Grace had logged, and the exhaustion he had dismissed as a lack of focus. She had been carrying more than just a demanding workload. She had been carrying the weight of an uncertain future for herself and her child. I should have seen it, Elon admitted, his voice low. I've always valued your work, Grace, but I never stopped to think about what it cost you. Grace shook her head, her expression a mix of exhaustion and resignation. I believed in what we were building at Tesla, and I didn't mind sacrificing a lot for it. But it became too much. I kept pushing myself, thinking I couldn't let you down. Elon's guilt deepened as he realized how much Grace had endured in silence. She hadn't just been an employee. She had been a cornerstone of his success, someone who believed in his vision even when he had taken her for granted. "I've made mistakes," Elon said, meeting her gaze, "but I want to make this right, for you and your baby." The next morning, Elon called his legal and HR teams into an emergency meeting. His tone was firm, but his words carried an unfamiliar edge of urgency. "Grace and her baby are going to receive the best medical care available. I don't care what it costs. Make it happen." His team exchanged surprised glances, but didn't question him. Within hours, Elon had arranged for Grace to be transferred to a top-tier medical facility specializing in high-risk pregnancies and neonatal care. He personally called the specialists, ensuring they had all the resources they needed to provide Grace and her child with the best possible outcomes. But Elon didn't stop there. He revisited Tesla's policies, initiating a comprehensive overhaul of the company's approach to supporting employees. Extended parental leave, flexible working hours, and robust healthcare benefits for expectant parents became priorities. It was his way of acknowledging that his relentless drive for innovation needed to include humanity at its core. When Elon returned to the hospital to share the news with Grace, she was sitting up in bed, looking stronger, but still wary. He sat beside her, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've arranged for your care," he began, his voice measured. "You'll have everything you need, specialists, support, whatever it takes. And when you're ready, your position at Tesla is waiting for you, with accommodations to make sure you can balance work and motherhood." Grace looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Why now, Elon? Why are you doing this?" He met her gaze, unflinching. "Because I was wrong. I let my vision blind me to the people who make it possible. You shouldn't have to choose between your health, your baby, and your career." Grace's eyes softened, but she still hesitated. "I appreciate what you're offering, but trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I need to think about what's best for my baby, and for me." Elon nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness right away. I just want you to know that I see you now, Grace, and I'll keep proving it." As Elon left the hospital, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of humility. For all his accomplishments, this was the first time he had truly faced his own flaws and taken steps to correct them. Grace's decision remained uncertain, but he was determined to earn her trust, not through words, but through actions. The Tesla headquarters buzzed with anticipation as employees, media representatives, and invited guests gathered in the main atrium. The room was adorned with banners displaying the slogan, "Empowering people, building the future together." Elon Musk stood at the podium, his usual air of authority tempered by a newfound humility. This wasn't just another product launch or investor briefing, it was a moment of reckoning. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind for Elon. After Grace's hospitalization and the revelations about her struggles, he had taken a hard look at the company's culture. Now, he was ready to address it publicly. "I've spent my career pushing boundaries," Elon began, his voice steady but reflective. "But in doing so, I've sometimes overlooked the very people who make those ambitions possible. Today, I want to acknowledge that and take meaningful steps toward change." The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. Elon continued, outlining a series of sweeping changes: extended parental leave, flexible work schedules, comprehensive health insurance covering high-risk pregnancies and neonatal care, and on-site childcare facilities. The policies were bold, progressive, and designed to ensure that no employee would ever have to choose between their family and their career again. "These changes aren't just about correcting past mistakes," Elon said, his gaze scanning the crowd. "They're about building a workplace where everyone, regardless of their circumstances, can thrive." As he spoke, Grace entered the room quietly, supported by a close friend. Though still recovering, she had made the effort to attend, knowing how much this moment meant, not just for her, but for the countless employees whose lives would be touched by these changes. Elon's eyes found Grace in the crowd, and he paused. "There's one person I want to thank personally," he said, his voice softening. "Grace, your resilience, loyalty, and strength have been an inspiration. You reminded me of the values this company should stand for. For that, I owe you more than I can say." The crowd erupted into applause as Grace nodded, her expression a mix of gratitude and quiet pride. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not just as an employee, but as a person whose struggles had driven meaningful change. As the event concluded, Elon approached Grace, extending a hand. "Thank you for being here," he said. "I hope this is a step toward rebuilding trust." Grace hesitated, then shook his hand. "It's a start," she replied, her voice calm but firm. Elon smiled faintly, knowing that her trust would be something he'd have to continue earning. Several months later, the Tesla campus was alive with the energy of a new era. The once sterile corporate environment now boasted a child care center, flexible workspaces, and an air of optimism that hadn't existed before. Employees shared stories of how the new policies had transformed their lives, and the cultural shift was palpable. Grace returned to the company with her infant daughter Emma in tow. Her first day back was met with warm smiles and genuine support from her colleagues. Her office had been adjusted to accommodate her needs as a working mother, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Balancing her role as a mother and a professional wasn't easy, but the changes Elon had implemented made it possible. Grace found herself more productive and more fulfilled than ever, proving that when employees are supported, everyone benefits. Elon, too, had changed. His leadership style had softened, prioritizing empathy and collaboration without losing the edge that made him a visionary. He took time to connect with his employees, frequently visiting the child care center and listening to stories about how the new policies were making a difference. One evening, after a long day, Elon stopped by Grace's office. Emma lay in a portable crib beside her desk, cooing softly as Grace finished reviewing a report. "She's beautiful," Elon said, gesturing toward the baby. Grace looked up, surprised to see him. "Thank you," she said, her tone warm but measured. Elon hesitated, then spoke. "I wanted to say, seeing everything you've gone through and how you've handled it has taught me a lot, not just about leadership, but about life." Grace smiled faintly, her expression softening. "People can surprise you," she said, "even when they've made mistakes." Elon nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I hope I've been one of those people." As he turned to leave, he paused by Emma's crib, watching the baby sleep peacefully. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of clarity, not from a technological breakthrough or a successful launch, but from the realization that the greatest successes often come from lifting others up. The story ended not with a grand finale, but with a quiet moment of reflection, a reminder that even the most driven individuals can find redemption, and that the smallest acts of humanity can have the most profound impact. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more brutal.